You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hello?
Hey, Bob, are you advice LPB?
Yes.
What's that mean?
Advice is the name of the computer store in Luankabong where I got the computer.
Ah, okay. So you got a new computer?
I got a new hard drive. The old one's cracked.
Ouch.
So, yeah.
You got a new hard drive and they relabeled the machine Advice LPB?
Yes.
Funny. Okay.
I guess. Okay.
And they need to put your name on there so you could be identified.
You're the first person who ever questioned it.
So you're actually tomorrow, you're Wednesday, right?
4th, yes.
Yeah, so you're ahead.
Yes.
You're ahead.
I'm actually ahead by 11.
11
but it's
hours.
easier for me to calculate minus 13 for some reason.
Interesting. So thanks for coming on short notice because you're halfway around the world in Laos.
To be honest, I haven't read Alito's opinion, though I don't expect, if I did read it, it would tell me anything new.
Well, I read it, and I would say he wrote a bit of a treatise. I mean, there's nothing new about the controversy, but he wrote a treatise that I thought you would really enjoy because he actually did an analysis around what are the 5 factors that generate reasons for reversing precedent. And he gave kind of like a long list of cases that have been reversed by the Supreme Court. It was kind of an eye-opener. It's on like page 36. I mean, I could bring it up on the screen. I don't know I assume you're on a computer so you could see a screen, right?
Yeah.
Aren't you?
Yeah, let's try it.
Yeah, so to me, whoever he assigned the task of writing the footnote that's got like 60 cases cited, I didn't realize there were that many cases that they've reversed. And obviously they're sort of suggesting that they're...
Can you characterize the 60 cases? For example, I was thinking about amendments to the Constitution.
Right.
And there was a spate of amendments during the progressive era a century ago. Women's suffrage, direct election of senators, income tax. Since then, there have been what I would call trivial amendments, like electoral votes to the District of Columbia, much smaller scale.
Right.
So I'm wondering if you can characterize the 60 as being large or small on that kind of rough scale.
Yeah, I mean, we have, 200 years or so of the Supreme Court? More than that, right? What year was it? 1789 or something was the first year. And, this Roe versus Wade stuff is such a hot topic for such a lengthy period of time. And what surprised me was there were protests in Washington, D.C. almost instantly. I didn't realize you could organize a protest that fast. I mean, I don't know how they did it. I mean, it seems like Politico.
Do you mean yesterday or do you mean it's 50 years ago?
Oh, I mean, like last night, yesterday. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, one theory is Politico had this document for a while because it's dated February.
Right.
They literally were sitting on it and then organizing protesters and then sort of did the drop and created this almost immediate reaction in front of the Supreme Court building.
Well, I don't think Politico is the only possible organizer. I mean, this has been, I mean, the argument was in late January, was it? Or early February? And the writing was clearly on the wall. So anybody could have anticipated that there would come a time when the decision would be published, whether formally or informally, and organize the network. And it's very easy to organize nowadays, very easy.
It's a bit like a flash mob. You have everyone's cell phone,
Yeah.
and you just say,
anyone could have anticipated that there would be an occasion to mobilize the flash mob, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah, maybe that's what happened. Maybe that's exactly what happened. Maybe the sort of view was we're gonna see an opinion drop, and when it drops, everyone should meet up on the corner of, the Supreme Court street and whatever street it is,
or tune to the following alert: mobilize now, and then just send mobilize now to your disk list.
You have to wonder. I mean, I'll bring up this draft. It runs 60 something pages, but then it has an appendix that goes for another 30. So it's like 98 pages. You will definitely get a kick out of it. I'm going to bring it on the screen because they do a bunch of stuff, or Alito does a bunch of stuff that is got a certain authenticity to it. When I first read it, I said, well, I guess it could be a fraudulent opinion. But I had to say, as I read through more and more of it, I realized that it really had the flavor of his writing. And it had this sense of, hey, I'm just going to tackle this head on. Like you read the first couple of paragraphs even, and it says first draft. I guess it's like dated in February.
Yes, I haven't read the whole thing. I did read the first half dozen pages.
Yeah.
And the idea that it was a hoax never crossed my mind, really.
Well, you can imagine.
It sounded exactly like Alito.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine that there could be a hoax, right? I mean, you can imagine that people would start doing this sort of stuff, right? Generating, hey, let me write an opinion and get a reaction. Now, the Chief Justice Roberts essentially has started an investigation. So obviously that means...
And not only that, confirmed that it is authentic. And so right. That question drops. Yeah.
Right. So the first paragraphs are, hey, abortion presents a profound moral issue on which most Americans hold sharply conflicting views. I guess there's three camps, and the majority, like I think 60 or 70%, seem to be okay with abortion with some restrictions or some conditions to it. So to me, it's sort of like saying the right way to say this would be Roe versus Wade has been embraced by American society to the tune of 60 or 70%, which in the divided nation that we're in is actually not too bad, right? And he makes it sound like it's a 50-50 division or something, right? Which obviously it isn't.
My understanding is it's not 70% in any one position. The plurality, but less than a majority, is in favor of the original Roe v. Wade, basically no restrictions or none until the third trimester. Mm-hmm. Then there's a smaller but substantial portion of people who oppose it under any circumstances. And then there's a group in the middle that embrace various restrictions in various circumstances. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So there's like a historical analysis here that goes through kind of what's sort of the history of abortion. And I mean, there's just a lot of stuff to get through. But I wanted to turn to this footnote because I do think this is what constitutional scholars are going to spend a lot of time talking about, which is what's the role of stare decisis in a world that's changing rapidly and where the Supreme Court is looking at stuff through different lenses over different periods of time. So,
well, much less than it used to be, clearly.
Right?
Yeah. And I don't see any way around that. And the original Roe v. Wade did its part to bring that about because it was clearly a political decision. And by political, I don't mean anything pejorative. I simply mean having to do with policy, not with textual interpretation. And if that's the case, if it's political in that sense, here we are making policy, then of course we make policy as we go along, and stare decisis counts for less. Do you agree?
Well, I agree, and I also want to comment that when you're making changes that seem to be sort of settled to some degree in the fabric of society, you have a much larger row to hoe in explaining why you're doing it. Like it could have been just as easy for them to say, we reaffirm Roe versus Wade, and we're going to leave it to a case-by-case basis about how these individual states are picking dates and number of days and number of weeks and so on, and just take it as like we'll let the circuit courts kind of grind through a million cases, right? Because obviously the state legislatures are in season, and the conservative states are passing these laws to essentially test how far can they push it. And they didn't have to go all the way to, hey, we're just going to say it's totally in the hands of the states. That's what this does. This essentially says it's going to be 100% in the hands of a state. And if a woman doesn't like it, she can move to another state.
Yes.
And the genius, I suppose, of the American system is you can move if you can afford to move, or at least you can get on a Greyhound bus or something.
Yes, which in many cases is not true.
Yeah, I know.
Exactly. And we have to, and I was surprised by several aspects of this. For example, late-term abortion in the 6th, 7th, or 8th, or even 9th month. And it always seemed to me, without doing any research, that nobody would do that, would have a late-term abortion for fun, that there would have to be some serious medical reason behind it before you would put yourself through that. And that seems like obvious common sense. As it turns out, that is not true. There's a group called the Guttmacher Institute, which is pro-choice, but which does research on all of these issues. And it turns out that people have late-term abortions because they didn't know they were pregnant.
Yeah.
Or because, I mean, really, or because, well, I couldn't make up my mind, or I changed my mind, or just the most asinine kind of crap. I mean, there are a lot of people in this country, and some of them are really pretty helpless.
Well, and some of them are really obese, and they could carry a child that arguably adds another 30 pounds. And it's like they're already 350 pounds. So it's like 10% more weight. What's the big deal? I just weigh more. I mean, there's all sorts of stories, like some women go to McDonald's and they're obviously obese women, and they end up having essentially
baby in the bathroom.
Yeah, like literally. So this is the page 37. On many occasions, this court has overruled important constitutional decisions. We include a partial list in the footnote that follows this, footnote 47. And so it literally goes through, like you can count it. I think it's like 60 cases. The footnote goes on to the next page. Like it's a whole nother page of footnotes. And, you know, I'm sure there's going to be, I think it even goes to the next page, there's going to be a constitutional course in this sort of analysis of what are these 5 factors that weigh in favor of doing a constitutional reversal, right? Like,
well, just quickly scanning the footnote.
Right.
And to answer my own question, no, these are not trivial, you know, T-crossing sort of decisions. These are substantive decisions.
Correct.
So I'll give them that for sure.
Right. So someone spent a fair amount of time. This is almost like taking a constitutional law course in one 98-page ruling and saying, look, the court has the power and has used that power in the past to reverse itself in significant decisions. And you pointed out some justices are even speaking about it openly, like, hey, this decision's got to be reversed, right? Like Gorsuch did that recently in some context that you noted. And I think they are becoming kind of very public figure-like, whereas years ago, I think it was a much more introspective job. Now it's become almost like a job for a famous person. I mean, look at RGB. She's become like like a symbol of a woman as a dissenting justice, right? She's still sort of a character. I mean, you see all sorts of different memes with her. But yeah, there's a lot of cases cited. And he's saying, look, sometimes you just have to do this. and he's garnering the votes, which looks like he has 5 or 4 others, because it looks like Roberts is undecided, but something I read recently said Roberts wanted to uphold Roe versus Wade, but wanted to say that
Roberts is not a guy who jerks the steering wheel.
Right.
I would be surprised if he signed on to this.
Right, exactly. This just went too far for him. So it's a 5-4 with obviously the 3 new Trump appointees, all of which said, Roe versus Wade is precedent, right? Like they said, and it had been affirmed, and they made it sound like they weren't going to touch it, all 3 of them.
Well, they all use the phrase settled law.
Settled law, right?
Okay. Roe is settled. I was reading a column from The Guardian, English paper.
Right.
This, by the way, is named Marina Hyde. She's extremely witty and sharp. And she said, they may say settled law, but it's never felt settled to me. It's always been contested since it came down. And that's true.
Okay, so you're saying
that's true. It's never been settled because it's never been settled politically. It never settled the hash.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And they could do that, but that wouldn't settle the hash. I mean, they could affirm it again, as has been affirmed before, but that would not settle the hash.
Right. So you could say in that context, it's maybe a view can be taken that this is why you have different states as different sovereigns that make their own laws and decide what to police and what not to police. And if you don't like it, you move. And I guess if you really don't like it, you move out of the country, right? You really super don't like it.
People do that.
Right? There are people that give up their citizenship. Now, you haven't done that. You've moved.
Because I still need a passport, so I'd need another citizenship. But as for paying American taxes, that's not really no fun. It does nothing.
Right. You have no real protection of any. I guess you have Social Security that you're getting paid, but conceptually, as someone who's a retired,
my Social Security pays my federal taxes.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's really true.
That's what I was going to say. At some level, you're like the perfect candidate for figuring out how to take advantage of places like Puerto Rico, if you could do that while living most of the time overseas, right? Because
yes, we looked into this, and and it's a vague memory at this point, but there's some hurdle I would have to jump called Section 22. I forget what the hurdle is or how onerous it would be to jump it, but basically I put that away.
Yeah.
At that time. Yeah.
So getting back to it, they've got these 5. He's got these 5 factors that sort of says, well, you have to look at these 5 factors as though they're sort of a formula.
I'm looking at it now, page 39.
Right.
Sick.
Right. And so he actually marches through them, like the nature of the error. There's sort of a structural analysis, be the quality of the reasoning. I mean, it almost sounds like you're grading an exam, right? Like it's almost like you're going through and grading an exam. And so it's sort of like he's saying every one of the court's decisions can kind of go through this 5-factor analysis, and you may get differing results depending on how these 5 factors play. I just want to get through the other 3 because it goes on for a while. And I sort of wondered to myself, what does that mean for things like Griswold, right? Which you noted, well, that's a case that was sort of antiquated, right? Griswold was kind of an antiquated thing.
Well, again, judging by the political, and again, we're talking politics in the sense of this is dealing with policy, not the text of the Constitution. In that political sense, there was no political backing to Griswold. Nobody marched in the streets demanding that Griswold be overruled or that justices be appointed to deal with Griswold. It was politically a dead letter. This is not, never has been.
Right. Workability, our precedents counsel, and another important consideration deciding whether precedent should be overruled is whether the rule it imposes is workable. it can be understood and applied in a consistent and predictable manner. I mean, there's so many cases that I think are unworkable and really don't answer the question that they supposedly are meant to answer. But that's the third factor. Let's see what the fourth and fifth are. I can't remember what they were when I went through it.
Finally dealing with Casey, I see.
Mm-hmm.
Which, yes, I mean, that's an invitation to a lot more litigation, at least.
Right. Effect on other areas of law.
Okay. I want you to get to the fifth one, then I want to ask you a question.
Yeah, okay. So I'll get to E. Reliance interests.
Yeah.
Probably like the biggest one of all in this context, right?
It's certainly very large.
Right.
So the question I want to ask you is, these are Alito's criticisms of Roe. What do you think of the criticisms? When I was in law school, Roe was excoriated as incredibly poor judicial reasoning. Do you agree with that?
Right. Like there was a view that, was it Blackman that was the author of Roe? I think so. I think Blackman was.
Yes.
That he
So apparently by that article you sent me seems to indicate that Lewis Powell had a lot to do with it behind the scenes. He was also responsible for Bakke. And so apparently quite a seminal figure, like it or not.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think when you if you were to compare the quality of the reasoning and the writing, probably you would give Alito's opinion here a higher mark than Blackman's approach, because you would say, well, Blackman is sort of saying constitutionally there can be an analysis around the 3 trimesters and we can draw some lines around them. I mean, that's completely fabricated, right? There's nothing that you can...
Well, it's fabricated in terms of the constitutional text.
Right.
But if you're going to go into an area beyond the text, then you're making policy. I mean, it's not grounded in text, it's grounded in something else, and it's grounded in what he chooses. And so, yeah, Blackman said something, not in the course of writing Roe, but years afterwards, in self-justification, to the effect that I was trying to light a candle in the darkness.
Right.
And I thought that was an incredible tell.
Right.
I mean, I thought he was in the judge business. It turns out he's in the candle business.
He's in that.
I mean, right? I mean, he's got like this roving commission to do the right thing.
Yeah.
That's policy. I'm sorry, it is.
Yeah, it's policy, and it's sort of policy in the sense of a Supreme Court taking the view that without them setting policy, then the policy that devolves on the states will be a mess, which you could argue.
And you could argue that there are a lot of bad welfare consequences to women who are giving birth in bathrooms in McDonald's, or women who are trying to abort themselves with hangers or some kind of strong drugs, or jumping out of the second story. I mean, you could come up with 100, 1,000 bad consequences of the old abortion regime. And if you're in the candle lighting business, that can count for a lot. I mean, I'm not denying that, of course.
Right.
But there's a price to pay for it. And the price is what we've seen for the last 50 years, which are the Supreme Court totally turned into a political contest, confirmation hearings reduced to screaming matches, every Supreme Court appointment turning into another tug of war over this one issue. It was incredibly unhealthy. And not only that, it will go on being unhealthy.
Oh, so there's sort of an argument. Right.
This will repeal Roe, but the contest won't be over. And then the people on the other side will say, we have to reinstate Roe. We have to appoint justices committed to doing that. Presidential candidates will campaign on that issue. It just will not stop.
Right. So you could argue the defect in the constitutional structure is it's just horrendous to get a constitutional amendment, because you could write, and one could write, a constitutional amendment about privacy or about freedom of choice or whatever rubric you want to put it under. If you want it to be broader, I suppose you embed an explicit privacy amendment into the Constitution.
That would not be a crazy thing to do.
No,
and there certainly is a liberty interest in the government not getting in your face all the time.
Correct.
I mean, imagine the government saying, we want people to look similar so they don't feel envious, so everyone has to wear a uniform. I mean, there's nothing in the Constitution against it, but that would really suck.
Right.
And people would not, I mean, there is a liberty interest.
Right. So the question in many ways is, did the founders just mistakenly think, hey, we can call a constitutional convention like every 50 years and slap together some amendments? Because in a way, that's the better approach than letting 9 old men or 6 old men and 3 old women or whatever the combination is at this point. It's hard to figure out. And they're all old in my book, but maybe Kavanaugh is young, but he drinks a lot of beer. So I don't know.
How old is Amy Barrett?
Oh, yeah, she's young. So Kavanaugh and she are pretty young. I want to say she's like in her 40s, and I think he's in his.
I would have said 51, but you could
really?
be right.
Yeah, I mean,
guessing. The
eldest is leaving is Breyer, and he's going to be, I think, 92 or maybe 82, maybe 83. And Alito is 72. And
Thomas is in the upper 80s.
Who's that? Thomas, yeah.
Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure his wife must be aging him at this point, given the stuff that's been revealed about text messaging and the like. But, conceptually, I think the defect that would have to be fixed in a very modern way with some, modern voting system is, how do you get a constitutional amendment to... That's
why I was looking at the constitutional amendments, just to see if anything substantive has happened in the last 100 years.
Right.
And I guess the biggest of them in the last 100 years are 22nd, 2 presidential terms, and 25, presidential disability, which has never been invoked. It's very, very difficult to amend the Constitution, very difficult.
Right.
And I don't expect this to lead to an amendment.
Right. But you would say that maybe that's a defect. I mean, some people think that's a positive because, but I can tell you in other countries, and I think you've looked at some of the constitutions in other countries, they pass amendments like every other year. I think the Mexican Constitution's been amended like 600 times. I mean, there's data about this. There's books that are called the Constitutions around the world, and whatever number of countries there are, let's call it 200. I know it might be more, it might be less. They each have some version of a constitution or some principal document that sort of is the be-all, end-all. And ours gets amended the least around the world if you did kind of a world thing. I mean, the other piece of data is this abortion stuff is covered in different constitutions around the world. And I think in the EU, they sort of follow the Roe versus Wade approach, which is, yeah, you can get an abortion, but it really has kind of a time limit to it.
I'm not sure if there's a uniform EU rule or not. I seem to remember Portugal, it may have been, just recently changed its abortion law to liberalize it. So apparently there's no one size fits all.
Yeah, I don't think there's an EU rule, but I think there is sort of like a majority of European countries, each of which individually, and there might have been some attempt at a European Union rule, and it failed for probably the same reasons that this approach. I mean, that's an interesting comparative law question, which is what is actually going on around the world, and how would it work if a pregnant woman left the United States and went, say, to Italy or Germany or France, and what would the medical profession say to her about, hey, I want an abortion? Well, you're in the wrong trimester. You should have come to us 13 weeks ago or something.
In some countries, yes, and in some, no. France is always held up as the shining example of medical care. Expats or no expats.
Right.
So,
like they've
and
got
there
a
may be
pharmacy
a
on
totally
every
different
corner.
law in Spain.
Right. I mean, the funny part about France is I think most of the people, particularly in Paris, are like hypochondriacs. There's like a pharmacy on every corner of Paris with their green sign. I don't know if that's what you see where you are in Laos. I get the flavor that every country has its own kind of approach to healthcare. And
there are few doctors here. Pharmacists do a lot more than they do in America.
Right.
And drugs are dispensed a lot more freely than in America. As far as expats go, I've now had 4 vaccinations.
Right.
Nobody said one word about my citizenship status. Nobody charged me as much as a nickel.
Wow.
I mean, yeah.
They didn't even look at your identity. They just said, get online and we'll jab you, right?
I must have gotten a vaccination card the first time, and I must have had to submit a passport for that, just for their records. But no, it's not an issue.
Wow. So they've got kind of a socialized medical care system is what it sounds like.
Yes. It's my favorite 4-letter communist country. It really is.
Is that right? Is
Yes.
that true?
Yeah.
So when you kind of look at how they handle abortions, what would you say happens there?
I actually don't know. They may have socialized medicine, but they're quite conservative sexually, quite conservative. I mean, all this business about sex tourism in Thailand, that would never fly here.
Yeah.
You can't cohabit with somebody of the opposite sex unless you're married. You can't sleep with a married woman under penalty of criminal law.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, the appendix that I'm on, just to sort of wrap up here, is the appendix has like every state law from the earliest year, like Missouri in 1825, Illinois.
And what's the cash value of that? I mean, take the Eighth Amendment, which I'm sure is clearer. When the Eighth Amendment was passed, every single state allowed capital punishment. So does that mean that the Eighth Amendment cannot be extended to ban capital punishment? Is that the end of the discussion? What's your view?
No, I mean,
I'm sure all this is in aid of, there was a lot of abortion restrictions in various states at the time the 14th Amendment was passed. And, I mean, without going through it, I'm sure that that's correct.
Right, and they're all worded slightly differently. I mean, it's an interesting comparative law point that, you know, you have all these different states all taking kind of a different textual approach.
But is that dispositive? Is it if a majority of the states that ratified the 14th Amendment did forbid abortion, is that the end of the discussion, in your view?
No, I don't think it's the end of the discussion, but I do think it's sort of a statement like each state is actually exercising a policing power. And I wanted to get to this point, and it does dovetail in. You know, there's probably an argument in some states that you actually need more population in a state. Like in states like Wyoming, what is it, like 500,000 people in the whole state?
And falling. So good luck, relying on closing the abortion mill to build up the population.
Well, it sounds corny, but, you know, there is a public interest in having new workers come to support the Social Security system, right? I mean, there is actually sort of a logical reason from a public policy point of view.
Yes, but that's a policy issue.
Yeah, it's a policy issue. And, you know, what I didn't see in the opinion was anything like.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this episode of The Valley Current.